In the sandbox, Chairman.
We'll call the Senate Minerals Committee meeting to order. And the first order of business is a carryover on Senate File 55. We were on public comment on last week, on the 21st, and I left it open. So is there any more public comment, please?
Do roll call quick before that.
Why don't we do roll call first, before you come up? Please.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. Senator Beitman,
Excused.
Senator Cooper,
Here.
Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Senator Wasserberger,
Here.
Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Thank you.
Now, we can go to that public comment on Senate File 55, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing testimony today. My name is Ken Houck. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Association of Wyoming Insurance Agents, commonly referred to as AWIA. I've personally been in the insurance industry for 49 years and been a part of AWIA since the 80s as a member, board member, executive vice president on a couple of occasions. Since we don't often appear in your committee, I'll give you a little background. AWIA is comprised of independent insurance agents. They provide property and liability insurance and life and health insurance products to their clients. Our members represent many, many insurance companies. Most of them have anywhere from 20 to 100 insurance companies that they represent. Our membership includes over 250 licensed insurance agents in the state of Wyoming, located in 83 different offices in about 50 different communities and 18 different ownership groups. You'll see, if you walk in the office in any of those places, you'll see the numerous insurance company brands that you'll recognize, such as Liberty Mutual, Safeco, Acuity, Travelers, Progressive, MetLife, EMC, Hartford, Grange, and some of those companies. AWIA's roots go back to 1933 in Wyoming under different names, and some of you may know us from our famous Shrimp Bash, which this year will be the 40th time we've presented that event. Some of the information I'm going to share with you today comes from my personal experience in this industry and in many diverse roles. So speaking on Senate File 55, and recognizing that the reinsurance conversation that kind of started the whole thing is a whole separate topic. So let me provide some current event background on InsurTech. There's a whole subset of current insurance activity being conducted out there, and they call it InsurTech, and it's been around for a while. They're not necessarily creating innovative policies. What they are great at is creating technology tools to order and deliver the traditional products in a more efficient manner. That's what they're doing. Chat box, apps, telematics, those are all new tools, but they're not insurance products. They're just a delivery and rating process that's a little bit more efficient. It's basically self-service in minutes for people who want to buy their insurance that way, which stuns me because they'll complain about checking out at Walmart on their own, but they'll buy insurance on the internet by themselves with no advice. That's kind of interesting. So several years ago, the InsurTech sector boldly claimed they were going to disrupt the insurance world. Some are surviving, some are disappointing. A few have actually created IPOs, and I've seen their stock value drop about 80% in the last year, and I do follow three of them pretty closely. One of the IPO companies just about a month ago laid off a fourth of their staff, which was about 300 people. So they're struggling with some of their InsurTech. And some of the InsurTech companies have already been built up by traditional insurance companies or hedge funds, and there's room for that product out there. They just haven't quite figured out where it fits yet. What people seem to forget sometimes is that the insurance product has not changed at all since Lloyd's of London wrote the first ocean cargo policy in 1686. The insurance policy hasn't changed. What we insure does change, and it changes over time. So there's some things in this bill that give us anxiety. Starting on page 4, this bill carves out just about the entire insurance code. It took us 100 years to get to this point, probably, on the insurance code, and give for some perspective, okay? Would you ever consider doing that, carving out the entire code for attorneys, medical professionals, security brokers, or realtors, and they're all similarly licensed professionals like we are. So I don't think that wouldn't be a prudent process. We do believe this particular bill has some unknown and unidentified hazards, And I do believe the entry fee for innovators to come and play in our sandbox is way, way too low priced. We believe that adequate resources to be successful at the innovation stage and capacity to respond if things go awry or sideways are firms with financial resources. Resources to do the good and resources to protect against failure. If you're inclined to pass this bill, I've offered 3 suggested amendments that you have in front of you. The first amendment is to change the application fee to $5,000 instead of $500. The second is the bond that's filed with the commissioner, raise that bond to $1 million rather than $10,000. An additional verbiage to give the commissioner some leeway on the bond amount when it's justified by an AM Best rating. Now, those fees may sound kind of high to some people, but the combination of a bad outcome, complicated by no recovery sources, could be very, very expensive for Wyoming. Here's another perspective. We ask Wyoming contractors who get bids on Wyoming projects to provide bonds in the multi-million dollar range. We know those contractors, we know who they are, they've built a lot of highways for us already, a lot of buildings, but yet we require those bonds in those large amounts. And yet we're off, the bill as presented offers only a $10,000 bond, which is going to be a cash bond. It's not going to be a real bond. The advantage of a bond and higher limit is somebody else does the background check on the character and the capacity of the party involved. The AM Best rating kind of does that for you. Okay? Some people may think I'm crying wolf, but we've been here before, actually. Many of you are not aware of this, but I'm going to share something with you that some of our members still recall the fallout of the accidental insurance sandbox in 1989, or late 80s, let's put it that way, the late 80s. In the course of 18 months, 3 insurance companies started from scratch in Wyoming. July of 87 was the first one, January of 88 was the second one, and January of 89 was the third one. The first company came to Wyoming with several $1 million of resources. The principals actually had insurance experience. There was a lot of fanfare, but they also had a major multi-million dollar judgment from a previous insurance scheme that they had in another state. At their peak, they maybe employed a dozen people. The second company came to Wyoming with very limited resources, a principal who was a vacuum cleaner salesman, okay? I'll let that set for a bit, but with a viable idea, surprisingly. At their peak, they employed 4 Wyoming citizens. The third company came to Wyoming with a principal who was a former police detective. Minimal resources and just not much else. I don't believe I can't recall if they ever hired anybody in Wyoming. Over the next 36 months, all 3 companies failed. The Department of Insurance took possession of those companies. Insurance coverage vanished for people who bought insurance from them. Doors were locked. Court cases resulted in judgments, and jail time was issued to some people. Full disclosure, I worked for that second company for about 6 months. I was actually on the board. And after I was there for 2 months, we didn't have a board meeting. I recognized that this is probably not where I want to stay very long. That was the vacuum cleaner salesman who was my boss. Interesting in that, though, I and the 3 people who worked there, we could all spell insurance quite well, and we were actually making progress and making good results, achieving what we were trying to do. The owner, however, was playing a shell game with the money. He didn't understand the concept of reserves. I believe I was very fortunate to have a front row seat to the world of a group of people I'll call scoundrels and con artists, in this case, eventually some convicts. The lessons I learned there have really treated me well over my career. For part of my career, I actually hunted scoundrels, insurance scoundrels to be specific, who were attempting to illegally take money away from my employer. Some of them are quite bold. They're in every corner of the insurance world, but I can assure you that they don't park their office on Main Street. They don't have a neon sign. They are not actually legitimate insurance people. Previous testimony referred to legacy insurance companies as being good but not very innovative, and that would have been very, very, very accurate a few years ago. But legacy insurance companies have become more innovative. New insurance policies have always been created when the need arises, and they're coming out in a significant amount of new policies and new coverage is showing up. For example, cyber insurance wasn't needed 10 or 15 years ago. Today, it is the hottest ticket in town, except the claims are going so high that the price of renewal policies is 3 and 4 times what they paid before, with a lot less coverages than they had before. So that's going to flesh itself out a little bit. Cannabis insurance, Didn't exist, it does now. As a matter of fact, there's a new endorsement for a homeowner's policy. You can get cannabis endorsement on your homeowner's policy for your legal uses of cannabis. That's brand new. Non-owned motorized scooter liability. Anybody rent a scooter downtown today? Not today, probably. When you jump on that scooter, you inherit some liability. There's no protection for you anywhere, any place. The new endorsement coming out on the homeowner's policy provides an opportunity for non-owned motorized scooter liability. Airbnb didn't have coverage before, now it does because there's a home share and host liability endorsement available. Home-based businesses, been around for a long time. My career, I spent 10 years working in an office and 10 years in an executive suite and 40 years basically working from the trunk of my car or an airplane or a hotel. So I had a home-based business, but we have a company that almost all of our agents will represent that's been writing home-based businesses insurance for probably 40 years. Utility line expense, you probably never thought about this, but if your sewer line craters between your house and the street, that's your problem. That's now an insurance endorsement on the new version of the homeowner's policy. It's available. Uber drivers, that was a complete disaster when it first started because you were converting personal lines drivers into commercial drivers, and their policies were not responsive. But the legacy companies, the biggest ones, State Farm, Farmers, Insurance Group, and Allstate responded very quickly to make sure they protected their drivers, their insureds. Uber, on the other hand, didn't like to be responsible for anything insurance. So conveniently, my testimony didn't get heard a couple days ago because just in my news feed yesterday, here's some new, fresh off the press stuff. Cryptocurrency recovery from theft. That's a new product that an organization is developing right now. It's not, we're going to make you whole that you lost your Bitcoin, but we're going to try to go find it for you. That's what the product line is right now, the way it's sitting. That is being developed by Burns & Wilcox, which is the largest privately owned managing general agency in the United States and Canada. They have 60 locations in those countries. These two countries, they also own a Lloyd's of London cover holder, which is someone who's got a membership at Lloyd's of London. So that's where they're developing that, out of the Lloyd's of London. So that's pretty new. And this just showed up yesterday too, and I don't know why I'd never seen this before, but I got a link to an InsurTech Hartford Symposium. That's the name of it, InsurTech Hartford Symposium. Every April, this is the 5th year they've done this. Again, it surprised me. They have about 1,000 attendees, about 100 speakers. They're from numerous companies, and a lot of them are legacy insurance companies. Recognizable names, AXA, Sampo International, Farmers, Hartford, Allstate, Hanover, Swiss Re, Mika, Travelers, Lloyd's of London, EMC. Those are all speakers. I might suggest you send a delegation from Wyoming to that conference in April. And if you need an insurance interpreter, I think I know somebody who might be able to help you there. So thank you, and I do stand for your questions.
Questions, committee, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. Ken, appreciate you being here. And I do have a couple of quick questions, particularly with concerns regarding the $10,000 bond, and I understand those concerns, but the language specifically on page 15 is the bond amount shall be determined by the commissioner in an amount not less than $10,000 and shall be commensurate with the risk profile of the innovative insurance project or service. The concept there is trying to be flexible but setting a floor as opposed to setting a number certain. The criticism that you provided was based on a number certain. I agree. I can't imagine very many circumstances where $10,000 is going to be sufficient. Maybe $1 million is too much depending on the size of the sandbox. If you've got 3 or 5 customers and it's a relatively small initial product, I could see a circumstance where $1 million might be too much. What are your thoughts on that language? Because the criticism was based on the specific amount, but again, when we addressed this during the interim, we wanted to ensure that that number was based entirely on the discretion of the insurance commissioner at what is an appropriate risk profile. Your industry is very, I would say, developed when it comes to risk profile concepts. So is this a concern that the insurance commissioner wouldn't have sufficient information or capability to set that bond at the right price?
Well, I can answer that pretty clearly. The current leadership at the Department of Insurance, I have a lot of confidence in them, but you have to understand that position is an appointed position. Sometimes that person has legal background. Sometimes that person has been in the department for a while. Sometimes that person has both of those things. Sometimes that person comes from the insurance industry, and sometimes it's just somebody getting a job. I've known all the commissioners since 1981. I've known a lot of their leadership teams, and I can tell you right now, this is the best, most competent group of people we had up there. That doesn't always happen. We've had some people in there in that time period that couldn't spell insurance, couldn't spell working for the government, no insurance experience, no legal experience, and it wasn't very
Okay, that makes sense. Another question, getting back to the use cases, you laid out a lot of different types of insurance and then basically said that in the general process hasn't changed since, I think, 1686. The idea of the insurance product, I think you have all the flexibility you need probably to create insurance products, maybe not. What we ran into when we started working on this legislation got to the reinsurance side that you discussed earlier, and the fact that their business practice and their business model was very different from traditional insurance. And that was where we saw that our statute was not effectively crafted in a way that provided opportunity within that business sector. So the concern of the sandbox isn't for right down the middle of the plate products, which I think you described, but the idea that somebody in the insurance space might want an innovative business model and business practice that they would be precluded from, like the reinsurance folks that we spoke with. And this flexibility would potentially be for that. So do you feel that there's need for that flexibility for innovation on kind of the business flow and the regulatory side, or is that something where 1686, it was good enough now, it's good enough then, it'll be good enough to 2686?
So let me give you a little clarification on the 1686. The concept was, it was an ocean cargo policy. Somebody had a risk, they were concerned about the risk, somebody was willing to take the risk, they analyzed the risk, they put a price on it. That's what we still do today. I don't care what, if we're insuring this box right here, that's what we're gonna do. That still happens that way. Now, we insure different things, and different things require different assets and stuff like that. Most of the really creative things in the history of insurance have come out of Lloyd's of London. That's the first place, because those people are creative. That's what they do for a living, and they are usually the first step into a new insurance arena. Sometimes I see things where it looks like it's going to be, and again, in the 80s, it was an economic development thing. We're going to have all these insurance companies. Things have changed since the pandemic. Nobody's going to come to Wyoming, build buildings. Nobody's going to occupy buildings. The insurance companies have figured out they don't need buildings to function anymore. They all function very well remotely, and they're all going to have their legacy platforms. They got the big signs out front and all that kind of stuff, but nobody's probably going to domicile an insurance company in Wyoming anymore. And that disappoints me, because I'd love to have two more companies here, like Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Mountain West Farm Bureau. I'd love to have more of those, but they're just not going to come to Wyoming. They don't need to anymore. And the pandemic taught them that work from home works just fine. I don't know if I answered all your questions.
Sure.
You gave me a lot of them.
Yep, no worries, thank you.
I think that Lloyd's of London 1686 was before LSO, and that's why it got written that way. I'd like to welcome Representative Yin to the Minerals Committee meeting. Thank you for coming and joining us. Any other questions for Ken? Any other questions? Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Ken, for your testimony. Is there any other room testimony for Senate File 55, Insurance Sandbox? Insurance Sandbox. And that wasn't a guy that's going to testify. Do we have any Zoom? No Zoom and no room. We'll close public testimony, and committee, what's your pleasure?
Second.
Moved by Rothfuss and seconded by,
It was Cooper that moved it.
oh, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me.
Not that I'm versed
Glad I
in it.
said that.
Yeah, right? I want to give.
Seconded by Wasserberger?
Yep.
All right, I got that right. All right. There's quite a little bit to look at here on this bill. Does anybody want to offer any amendments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I am.
Just based on the suggestions, I have no problem with an increase to the application fee to $5,000 as suggested. I don't think anybody.
Page 11?
Yeah, that's page 11. If that would provide more confidence, I don't think that's unreasonable. If you haven't got $5,000 to work with on an insurance product, you probably don't have a very good insurance product. So I'd take that as a potential friendly amendment that I'll propose in a moment. The minimum of $1 million, maybe, that makes me a little uncomfortable, to be honest. A minimum of $100,000 probably doesn't make me uncomfortable, so I guess I would suggest on page 15, line 3, changing the $10,000 to $100,000, because once again, I just don't see a circumstance where a bond of less than $100,000 would probably be appropriate for anything that would be worth the time of and work of the insurance commissioner. So I'll propose that amendment to amend the fee to $5,000 and the minimum bond to $100,000, still leaving the discretion there. And I think that at least helps move it in the direction that OWEA is looking to, even if it doesn't fully achieve their interests.
Second.
And would you like to change page 15, line 7, after the word profile?
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't, because that, I think, is consistent with the discretion and probably an appropriate business practice by the commissioner. I think they would work within what is best practice within insurance industry right now. So I don't know that we need it. So just the 5,000 and
All right.
100,000.
Committee, the motion to amend is page 11, delete 500 and insert $5,000. And page 15, line 3, delete $10,000 and insert $100,000. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That one squeaked by. Any other amendments? Any other amendments, changes?
Question on the bill? Unless anybody wants to discuss, I'm sorry. Jumped ahead there. I guess you run amendments.
Don't hear any more amendments or changes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I will just say briefly that the intent of this legislation is first and foremost not to do anything that threatens existing insurance companies and existing insurance practices. And I think we worked really hard with the insurance commissioner and the division to make sure that was the case by adding robust language. Don't do anything that would threaten the NAICS accreditation, and coordinate on that. So that was a priority. And then I think that perhaps traditional insurance won't look to this. I don't know whether they will. The reinsurance was the original interest. That's a different industry. That was the impetus for it. I don't know what else is out there. If this never gets used, I don't think it hurts anything. It's one of those things that either does nothing or it does something good by providing an opportunity for innovation. There's a tremendous amount of consumer protection built into it, but if anyone's going to innovate in this space, this is, again, a large financial technology space, insurance technology space, a lot of opportunity here. If someone's going to innovate, I'd like them to do it in Wyoming, and this provides for that opportunity.
before we vote on that, we did have another request for amendment on page 4 and page 5. It's in your packet. I think it was Catherine Wilkinson that proposed it. Page 4 and page 5, they would delete lines 21 through 23 on page 4 and lines 4 through 8 on page 5. Is there a motion on that amendment? Is there a motion on that amendment? Is there a motion on that amendment? Hearing none, that motion to amend fails.
Mr. Chairman, if I can briefly address that, and I do totally appreciate and understand the concerns that were raised here, and this is something that was raised and discussed during your interim as well. We participated, and we didn't come to the point where we fully agreed on this, but this proposed amendment is the impetus to some degree for the language that we see at the bottom of page 13, the Romanet 7 that goes on to page 14, which I understand isn't necessarily sufficient for this particular insurance company that's being represented by the proposal. But I just will note that there was an attempt to address that concern through that language. I think it gets most of the way there to the point where our Department of Insurance could go neutral on it. And that at least made me feel good that we weren't potentially threatening the NAICS accreditation, which is as I understand it, the same concern of the insurance company that offered the amendment was, would this potentially threaten accreditation as the primary concern? So I wanted to make sure we addressed that, the reason for not, that I wasn't moving that amendment.
So it's been moved and seconded that we approve Senate File 55 as amended. Please call the roll.
Senator Beitman?
Aye.
Senator Cooper?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
Aye.
Senator Wasserberg? Chairman Anderson?
Aye.
5 do pass amended.
Next bill for your consideration is Senate File 56 lottery amendments.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin is on the Blockchain Select Committee. He might want to come up and present this if he has it. I'm happy to run through it. It's only a 2-pager, so hopefully we get this done in 5 minutes, but.
2-pager, you think Representative Yin can do it?
Representative Yin can do it. Oh, if you don't have a hard copy, here you go, Representative Yin. My apologies. I know you've got your phone, but.
Representative Yin, go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. Yeah, so I guess I will be presenting to you Senate File 56 lottery amendments sponsored by Blockchain Financial Technology and Digital Innovation Technology. So it's a fairly small bill, 2 pages, right? And it essentially it allows for both purchase of lottery tickets with virtual currency as well as the ability to ensure that the payment of cash prizes is the specification of the prizes where we have dollar amounts is specific for cash prizes. So essentially, this is a very permissive bill. It just allows for virtual currency lottery, and that's about it. It doesn't require this to be enacted. It just allows for the possibility and innovation of that sort of game, Mr. Chairman. And that's the bill.
That's the bill. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Yin?
I have a question.
Yes, Senator Cooper.
Mr. Yan, Representative Yin, I understand what we're doing here. Can you just briefly explain why we're doing this?
Mr. Chairman, so Senator Cooper, I think this helps cement Wyoming as the place where blockchain innovation happens. So not only does it incentivize businesses to see us as very friendly to the technology, but that it allows us to be innovative not only with the industry, but within ourselves as well. So it's just one more place where we see possibilities and innovation and somewhere where we can improve in Wyoming on the space.
Now, on page 2, it says all sales shall be cash or any virtual currency as defined. Is that true of the payout too? We're eliminating cash as a payout on page 3, but is it cash or virtual you can be paid out?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think I might have to get some call a friend, but I do believe that it does allow for virtual currency payout. The issue was that we didn't want to force retailers to pay out virtual currency prizes. This makes it easy for them to only handle the cash prizes, while we would have different rules surrounding how we would redeem virtual currency prizes, Mr. Chairman.
I think I'm still confused, Mr. Yen, but that's okay. I'm easily confused.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
On- on- On that, the structure was to try and ensure, as Representative Yin is saying, that either cash or cryptocurrency, virtual currency, could be paid in, again,
Right,
subject to
right.
appropriate approval, as
Right.
well as either of them could be paid out, but not having an obligation, which is currently actually under statute, where for certain prize values, you could go into a corner store and redeem your ticket. It's up to a certain amount. I don't know if we have that amount in front of us, and I can't remember what it is. I think it might be $5,000 or $600. The concept here, adding the cash in that area, was to ensure that if you're the corner grocery store, that you wouldn't have to pay out the cryptocurrency. because we're not going to obligate anyone to engage in cryptocurrency transactions as that corner store. And so we just wanted to make sure that we weren't doing anything that would penalize or make life difficult for those corner stores that currently facilitate these transactions.
Okay, so we think that by eliminating cash on page 3 on line 11, 12, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we're saying the participant can be paid out cash, crypto, or coupons. They can be paid out any way that they issue prizes. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, all right. All right. Any other questions of Mr. Yen? Other questions of Mr. Yen? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Yen, for joining us today. Come away from the dark side and over here. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, Jim Willix, Chairman of the Wyoming Lottery Board. So that's the hat I'm wearing this morning for you, or this afternoon for you. So Wyoming has become a leader in blockchain and crypto, and the opportunity for the lottery to be part of that is really an exciting thing for us. We really think it has potential to increase sales, increase exposure, and provides opportunities for us that by authorizing this, now we'll have to do the hard work of figuring out how to do it. And you point out some questions there that we want to be very conscious of. We work with the retailers, work with the marketing, and work with the idea out there. But having that option is really exciting for us. We had been talking about it as a board even before this bill came forward, or what are those opportunities for us with all the discussion that the blockchain technology group has had. We're really excited about it. The CEO, John Klontz, is here and could answer questions if you have more, but I just want to offer our full-fledged support and promise to you that the lottery board wants to deliver safe, secure, and fun games, and we'll do it under the umbrella that you give us, and we think this gives us a chance to really expand that and do it right under the regulations and things that we've set under blockchain and crypto and under the rules and regulations and laws of the lottery. So just here to offer my support and answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Willix? Questions for Mr. Willix?
Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
disappointed we don't have a bunch of them, Willix. Sorry.
Thank goodness, because I wasn't going to take the technical ones. I was going to take the big picture ones. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else on Senate File 56, lottery amendments? Lottery amendments. Seeing none, is there any on Zoom? No on Zoom and no in room. We'll close public comment, and committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill to pass.
Was that Cooper second? Cooper's kind of quiet today.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll just note, in the interim, we heard no pushback or concerns, honestly, from anybody that provided testimony on this. It is entirely permissive. I think the one possible concern was for those corner grocery stores and gas stations and folks that currently sell them, that we wouldn't put any onerous obligations on them to have to buy new equipment or something like that. So clearly this
Either that or you intimidated them. Other discussion on the bill? Any amendments? Any amendments on the bill? Nope, no amendments. Sensing you're ready to vote, let's do the roll call.
Senate File 56 do pass. Senator Beitman.
Aye.
Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger. And Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
5
Senate
do
File
pass.
56 has passed the Senate Minerals Committee. Next bill up for our consideration is Senate File 71, Deregulated Industrial Power Zones. Now that's a
Yeah.
title for you.
Now, Mr. Chairman, it's possible you'll hear some concern on this one.
Possible, huh?
You'll also hear some support.
All right, well, who's presenting the bill?
I'm going to walk through it. if that's
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, the background here and the motivation for it for this year came from the cryptocurrency mining community. Obviously, we had a lot of engagement with that community over the last few years through the Blockchain Select Committee. And there were some areas of concern expressed with how we do things in Wyoming relative to how things are done in other states, particularly Texas, where they have a deregulated marketplace that was allowing substantially lower rates for electricity and power provision. And so as cryptocurrency mining operations were looking for a place to relocate, and I say relocate because at a certain point last year, about 50% of the global hash rate, the mining capacity for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies was taken offline when it was expressly made illegal by China, where it was being done. So China made this illegal, and then 50% of the global hash rate was looking around for, all right, well, if we can't do it in China anymore, where can we do it? And they were looking for places to locate, and they were strongly looking at Wyoming because obviously we do have a lot of power production capacity. But I think one of the reasons why they were engaging with us enthusiastically is that we've always been very supportive of virtual currencies, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and all things in this space. So they came to us and talked to us and expressed this concern that what they were seeing in Texas, they'd love to come to Wyoming. And honestly, a lot of them basically said, Wyoming would be a first choice, but you just can't compete with the power costs of what we're seeing in Texas. Now, we learned more. There's not an infinite amount of that super cheap power in Texas, but there was plenty of it available. And they do have a deregulated market. You can remember last year, there was a time when everything kind of went upside down as a result of the deregulation and the failure to have redundancy. So we were caught in a situation where there was no question that there is incredible value to the people of Wyoming to have a regulated utility market for consumers like us, making sure that the lights turn on every time you flip that switch, and that you get a reasonable rate for that power that can't be incredibly volatile. So for, 95, 99%, whatever of the power consumption, we probably have a perfect system. The challenge is trying to meet those other circumstances where the 6-ish cents that they're getting through the current system is just not a good price. It's not what they're looking for. And I think everybody on this committee has heard that over the years before. This isn't unique to cryptocurrency mining. There are a lot of electricity intensive operations where Wyoming is not competitive because the regulated utility structure has a relatively fixed price, and it's challenging then to be competitive when they could go to another location and negotiate a price. Plus, we have franchise regions in the state of Wyoming, which means that you really only get to talk to one utility depending on where you want to locate. If you want to negotiate with someone else, you literally have to pull up stakes and go someplace else so that you can negotiate with a different utility, which again is just fine most of the time. But if you need a substantial amount of power, it becomes a challenge. So just to give kind of an order of magnitude concept of what we were hearing with regard to cryptocurrency mining, one individual that had a lot of conversations in this space estimated that there was 2 gigawatts worth of realistic demand available for power in Wyoming if the price were right. 2 gigawatts of demand here in the state. There is not 2 gigawatts available from our providers at this point in time. We can ask them, but they'd probably be challenged to bring 100 to 200 megawatts. So probably at best somewhere around the ballpark of 1/10 of the demand that's available. And then they would have to effectively be paying market rates themselves. So what would be happening is they'd probably be purchasing this power from elsewhere unless they had a long enough time frame to bring on new power. So the concept here is to try and create a hybrid, and we were looking for ways to maintain our current system when it's beneficial, but recognize that for large power purchase circumstances, a competitive, deregulated marketplace was just going to be superior. So the way this is structured, if we walk through it, is instead of deregulating across the state, providing an opportunity to have zones of deregulation. The deregulated zones would be on state lands of not less than 640 contiguous acres, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is in a moment. And it would be an application process. Nobody would be forced, nobody would be required, but if a Board of County Commissioners wanted a deregulated industrial power zone designated within their county, they would make that decision. Again, local control at that point, providing our county commissioners with the opportunity to plan their own path forward. If they don't like this legislation, they wouldn't have to use it, but giving them this as a tool in the toolbox. And they would make that application to the State Board of Land Commissioners, so the 5 electeds in that capacity. The Board of Land Commissioners would then task the Public Service Commission, and we have a representative, current Commissioner Throne here in the room on their behalf. Hi, Mary. And she's been working with us over the interim also to make sure that we were at least getting the language right. Obviously, they'll, as always, be neutral on this, but we appreciate all their hard work in ensuring that we're doing this in a way that was feasible. So the Board of Land Commissioners would ask the Public Service Commission to do an analysis to whether this adversely affects the ratepayers of the state of Wyoming. So in other words, if there was a deregulated power zone implemented with new load in that zone that would be consuming power, the PSC objectively would say, hey, this is a bad idea, this hurts the ratepayers, or this looks fine, it's not going to affect the ratepayers because it's not utilizing those resources, and provide that analysis back to the Board of Land Commissioners, which would then be able to approve or reject the project. If the project were accepted, then that zone would be designated as exempt from PSC regulation, which would mean a few things. You would be allowed to have competitive bidding for power provision within that zone. So any of our current utilities could offer power in that zone. They would have to use regulated utility rates to get the power there. So there's no discount or requirement that you provide free transmission lines or anything along those lines, but there are fair assessments of rates for those transmission lines, so that would be incorporated. But within the zone, you'd basically be able to freely bid, and there wouldn't be any franchise zones, which I can tell you, and you'll hear, the utilities have a lot of concern about violating the concept of the franchise zones because they see that as one of their key assets and something that they value. We'll hear that in public testimony. Another thing that you can do within that zone, which you cannot do anywhere else, is I could create an LLC and put in a power facility in that zone and sell the power directly to any number of corporations within that zone. You can't do that in Wyoming right now. You have to either own the power generation yourself, or you have to pay PSC regulated market rates for it. There's no third option. And that's been a real challenge over the years that I've identified through this committee, and I see it as a detriment to any large-scale project development in the state. So the intent here is a compromise. The intent is to provide some opportunity, not just for cryptocurrency miners to have flexibility and competition, but for other large-scale projects to have that flexibility and competition within the state of Wyoming. One other thing I haven't addressed yet is why state land and only state land. The reason really is the complexity of creating a property right associated with private property, where we're designating a zone of private property with a special dispensation, honestly reminds me of liquor permits, where, boy, I wish we hadn't done it that way. And I don't know how else to do it. So I'm not against the idea of having designations on private property. It's just that it seemed like it was going to make the bill 5 times longer, just trying to wrestle with how that would work. So that can be a future project. This was easy and clean, doing it on state land where it didn't matter. If you create one and then later eliminate it, nobody's going to sue anyone. So that was the motivation there. And obviously the Office of State Lands has flexibility to purchase, exchange, and do a lot of things with land. So if there's not a state section in the right spot, there can shortly be a state section in the right plot, in the right spot, if there is the the financial will to do so. And the final thing I'll note, because I think it's important, is nothing about this zone waives any other statutory obligations for permitting or any other requirements of oversight or any other departmental or divisional obligations. So it is not special in any other way than this PSC designation. And I think there's some concern there with the idea that we're fast tracking something. Any hearing that would be required under current statute would be required with this statute. Everything is effectively the same except for that competition. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions on how this works. And if there aren't any, I know there's public comment and we've got agencies here. I know Office of State Lands is here, and I don't know whether they want to provide testimony, but they're certainly here to answer questions. The PSC probably doesn't have specific testimony, but is here to answer questions. And I don't know what other agencies are interested, but
Thank you for your
we've got good
testimony.
support.
Go ahead and
Yep.
wrap it up.
I'm done.
Okay. Questions? Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how big are these things going to be? How much is it going to impact state lands? And have we talked to the local people who are leasing those state lands about their thoughts about this?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, as you know, state lands are obligated to get kind of a highest and best use and to make some money for our common school permanent land funds. And we can have testimony from the Office of State Lands. They see this as a potential increase in revenue because if they have an opportunity to be leasing the land for a use that generates a substantial amount of revenue. I mean, this doesn't have to be cryptocurrency mining, although cryptocurrency mining operations, if you were consuming hundreds of megawatts, that's going to bring millions of dollars to the state, not $1,000 a year per section, right? So yes, it might inconvenience the use of it for whatever if it's an ag use right now and you're picking a section that's currently leased for ag, honestly, you probably wouldn't even have to stop leasing it for ag. Depends on what you do on it. But if you were doing cryptocurrency mining, pretty sure the cattle don't care.
It's like a wind farm.
Yeah, exactly. They're gonna chew the food. They're gonna look over and they're gonna be fine. But again, that would be exactly the kind of thing that the Office of State Lands would contemplate and would work with. They have the tools and they do the same thing right now. If they're gonna focus on multiple use, they're gonna focus on all the things that they focus on right now, and nothing in this bill would preclude or bias them in any way for or against those things.
Senator Cooper had a question. Senator Cooper asked a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, within the state of Wyoming right now, there are oil and gas producers that are looking for some kind of value added to their product. And what they're trying to do is generate their own electricity to operate the wells, especially marginal wells that won't pay their current electric bills. So if they can generate their own electricity with their own gas, that creates a market for the gas, and it creates a low rate electricity to bring some marginal wells back online. These operators don't necessarily want to be in the power generation business. They'd rather hire a third party to come in and operate a generation plant inside of their lease and use that self-generated electricity to run the wells, not to sell out on the outside market, just in-house. But they have to do it as company owned currently, rather than hire somebody who's in the business. Would this be an avenue, a vehicle to allow that to happen, or?
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, probably not very much. And I'm aware of that problem, and that's a problem that I think that we need to address also. The way this is structured, you need to consume the power on the state section that's designated. If you have wells on that section, then you'd be able to do what you said, where you could have a separate facility, and that would be reasonable. The challenge, obviously, is you'd have to be on state land that was designated to be consuming it at that point. the model that you're looking for, which we've been hearing about for a number of years, and it's a real challenge, right? We know that power prices in the state of Wyoming for our oil producers and gas producers are very high, and that's, I think, their second most significant cost of operation, if I'm not mistaken. So it's something else that we should work on, and honestly, we should probably work on that through the Minerals Committee, because it's the same challenge, right? The regulated utility works great most of the time, but that's one we've talked about, and particularly with the co-ops, you end up with challenges where they did build that demand into their rate base, and so they have to recoup it, so it has to kind of be new load. This was designed for new load to try to not cause that problem. But you're absolutely right. That is a real problem.
Follow-up, Cooper? No? Senator Brightman?
I'll follow up because that was kind of my line of thinking. My mind started going when I heard about this bill. Could you conceivably get a state section approved for one of your zones and then go ahead and lease it, drill it, produce natural gas, have a crypto mining outfit come in and use that gas to generate their own power, and basically have your own crypto mining outfit on that state section with this bill? Would this bill allow that to happen?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Brightman, you can actually do that one right now without this bill.
Okay.
That's being done, and it's being done well all throughout the state right now. In fact, I know that our Office of State Lands had, and we can ask when Jason comes up, how many of those operations we have right now. That one can be done because we passed special legislation that allowed some cool things just a couple of years ago, recognizing that specific interest. Now, if you wanted to generate electricity from that natural gas and then in any way sell it to a third party once you've generated it, you're out of luck. If you wanted to do a third thing with it, no.
But you could sell it to yourself for the cryptocurrency operation, but it'd have to be selling it to yourself. Other questions? I have a few questions. I have a problem with an area designated state lands not less than 640 acres. Usually those state lands are sections, which are 640 acres. And I know in most cases, they're not tied together. So not less than 640 acres might be a problem in the future. They have not more than one area of unincorporated state land within the county constitution, less than 640 acres. So I have a problem with that 640 acres because they don't all tie together like some do. And then on the page 6, I got a problem with it goes right into transmitting that electricity you're producing outside of a deregulated industrial zone to a deregulated industrial zone. So I could see you having a regulated, deregulated zone here on 640 acres and transmitting electricity 300 miles away to another deregulated industrial zone. And I was thinking that wasn't what we were trying to do with this bill. I was thinking we were trying to produce it and consume it right there on that same deregulated industrial zone.
Mr. Chairman, I think the best use case is producing it and consuming it right there in the industrial zone. But that is not the only use case. The alternative use case is you're consuming power in the zone, but you're purchasing it from elsewhere. What this says, so at that point, you've got market competition. And again, we've got a number of regulated utilities, and then we've got a number of co-ops in the state that have different appetites for engaging in cryptocurrency mining or in other projects. And right now, they have the authority to say no, effectively. This would allow an opportunity, if you're in one of these zones, to have each of them compete. And it still might be at a higher rate than you would get if you were producing locally, but maybe one of them could give you 4.7 cents under certain terms and conditions, which might be better than the 5.2 cents under those terms and conditions you could get. So you'd be able to purchase it. What the F paragraph says is you have to pay fair market value for transmission costs. You don't get any free baggage rate, for that transmission. So F is contemplating where you're producing the power elsewhere and consuming it within that zone, you have to make sure that you're paying an appropriate rate to get it there based on that transmission distance and to whomever owns the lines and all of the rest of the concepts. So we worked on that, trying to get it to the point where it was fair, and that's based on protecting the ratepayers. Because if the ratepayers are paying for that line, they need to be compensated appropriately for that line. That's the concept.
Other questions for Senator Rothfuss or the presenter? Other questions? If not, we'll open it up to public comment and hear from the public about Senate File 71. Let's
the agencies first.
have the agencies go first if they so desire.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Crowder. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. Happy to speak to the bill and answer any questions. We did have a couple points that we wanted to raise with you, but happy to answer any questions first. And I can start with the questions that were raised earlier and specifically to the displacing or understanding the needs of a grazing lessee or a surface lessee. This is a process that we currently have in place and we utilize every day. Obviously, grazing is the most prevalent use on state trust lands, but we have a lease term provision that allows us to go in and develop minerals, also develop other uses like recreation or secondary mineral development type uses, a tank battery or roads or things like that. And that does have an impact on that existing surface lessee. So we handle that through allowing those uses via a special use lease or a temporary use permit. And a special use lease would be contemplated in this sense. That comes with a requirement that the lessee, the existing surface lessee, and most times that's a grazing lessee, provides a comment and a consent to the new activity. So it's not just that they tell us they have an issue, but they have to consent to that new activity as well. And if they withhold their consent for whatever reason, then we get to go in and have a conversation with them to understand what the impacts are and if we can get around them or not. And if we can't get around them, then there's a way for the Board of Land Commissioners to step in and have the ultimate say on how to best manage that property. But that doesn't come without compensation to that surface lessee. We do that through a surface impact payment. It's intended to compensate them for the loss of forage, loss of use, but mostly the nuisance of having that secondary use out there. It's a negotiated rate between that grazing lessee and the new company coming in, so the office doesn't come into it unless there's some crazy out of bounds negotiations occurring. But it is a negotiated rate that both parties have to agree to. So we feel like through the consent, through the comment form, and then through the ultimate payment of that, the surface lessee, the grazing lessees are at the table whenever we're making this decision.
Questions for Mr. Crowder? Questions for Mr. Crowder? Senator Wasserberger.
So of those lessees that have state lands, what have been their concerns with this?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wasserberger, we haven't deployed this, obviously, so we haven't talked about deregulated zones in any way, but we do have oil wells all across the state. We do have secondary uses. There's 6,400 special use leases in total that have gone through this process. Mostly it's you're impacting the amount of grass I have. So how can I get compensated for that? Or there could be a nuisance of road use, road location, and we get involved in those negotiations on where to actually place that secondary activity. But of course, it's forage availability, and we can't replace a blade of grass that's been destroyed by a secondary use, but we can offer compensation for that grass that's been displaced.
Follow up? No? Other questions? Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. And Jason, I know that you have done quite a bit of work trying to work with cryptocurrency miners on state lands. If you can provide just kind of a brief overview of where we're at with that. And then the second question would be, what are the office's thoughts on the potential for additional revenue from something like this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss. We have been approached by a few companies for crypto mining on state lands, and they are expecting to use gas that would otherwise be flared, use that for their power generation. And these are out in the middle of nowhere state of Wyoming. So it's interesting to see a new market out there, a new revenue stream for us. We've negotiated 2 permits successfully currently, anticipate more coming, but that's what we have on the books right now. Obviously, when folks are looking to utilize state land for any kind of development, they're weighing all of the costs of that development, including operational costs, as well as the lease cost back to us when they determine if they can actually make it feasible to operate on our lands or not. So we do feel the bill may start to reduce those costs, those stacking of blocks of operational considerations, and that we may get some more in the door. They just don't come in the door right now because it's just simply too expensive to operate on our lands with everything else they might have to pay for. That being said, we negotiate each and every lease that comes through the door. All of those are the negotiations start with comparable uses if we can find any, and then it's obviously a conversation with that applicant. If they are overburdened or heavily burdened by operating costs, then obviously the negotiation that we can have with them is somewhat limited. We may only get pennies on the dollar for a lease if they have to make the rest of their revenue pay for operating functions. So anytime there's an opportunity to reduce those operating costs, we feel like we can be more successful in our lease negotiations and provide more revenue back to our beneficiaries. And we feel like the bill has an opportunity to do that.
Other questions? Other questions? I have a question. Why do you think they're targeting state lands since we have so many federal lands? Why do they want state lands?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great question. I do feel like we're a little more nimble and we have a lot less regulatory hoops to jump through. Obviously, the state of Wyoming is not subject to NEPA requirements when there's no federal nexus. State lands don't have that. So we can get a lease in and out the door very quickly.
Okay. No further questions? No further questions? Thank you, Mr. Crowder.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, we had 2 points to the bill that I wanted to raise with the committee. The first was ensuring that the Board of Land Commissioners had authority to do this. And we've worked with the bringer of the bill over the interim to ensure that that has occurred. We may be there. I don't know if we're fully there yet through the exemptions, but also we are not experts in the realm of the Public Service Commission, where their authority comes from, where it can be moved or not. And so we just want to ensure that the committee is aware that we need to, if the Board of Land Commissioners is going to approve these zones, that they actually have the authority to do that when they approve an application. Mr. Chairman, the last point I would raise to you is that the bill expects that any rules that will be developed to allow this process to go forward be done by July 1st of 2022. That's a very quick turnaround, and we would ask for an extension of that possibly to the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Crowder. Want to welcome 2 legislators from the other side. Representative Western, thank you for coming and being with us, and Representative Olson, thank you for coming and being with us. Obviously, some interest in this bill. Anyone else in the public like to address the committee? Come right up there. You dropped your napkin or something. Oh. There.
This is on. Oh,
There it
we
is.
go. My name is Sean Octavius Murphy, and I am here as an investor and as an advisor to a large blockchain Bitcoin mining company. And I'm not being paid to be here, though. I'm really representing myself.
You're like us.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here as an
Yeah.
investor, right?
Yeah.
And I'd like to share 3 things in support of this bill, and then one concern that I have, which is more broad than that. So the 3 things in support. First, what I've observed from the Committee on Blockchain is tremendous. What they've done out of session to move innovation, it's made me proud to be a Wyomingite. I moved back to Wyoming 6 months ago, and to see what has developed and what both the legislators have done as well as the private individuals on the committee is amazing. And this bill is partly a reflection of that, taking on a big issue, a tough issue, and really working hard to find opportunities for economic development. And this bill does that. Secondly, I'd like to just have a vote of confidence and support for Black Hills Energy. They have really worked hard in this capacity too. They've worked with Bitcoin mining companies. They've tried to find unique solutions to work with companies in this space. And they've really been a best of breed operator in our state. And that's really in comparison to how Rocky Mountain has operated with this industry, with miners and digital companies. So we have the committee vote of confidence, this bill vote of confidence, as well as Black Hills. But the third piece that I'm in support of is we brought up and we heard about flaring. And that's been well and good in Wyoming, but that's small scale. That at most is a couple of megawatts of mining happening at these sites. What this bill is trying to do and seeks to do is large scale, large projects, big business, big economic development in the state. And that's why this is important. We don't see huge gains and returns from small operations all over, out in the boonies in Wyoming at these sites. We need these industrial power zones to bring in large scale mining operations, large scale data centers, which really comes to my one concern and something that I appreciate your good consideration on. And that's just comparing what's going on here with this legislation to the nuclear legislation. So here we have an experimental site where we're going to have nuclear waste that's going to generate 300 to 500 megawatts of power, none of which has been allocated or none of which anything in this legislation supports the use for building other business. So we're really supporting Rocky Mountain and this company they're working with. They're investor owned. We know Berkshire Hathaway owns them. That's Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. So we have a couple of these large interests coming in the state, but we've seen nothing that they want to work with us miners and us large data centers. We've set up a Microsoft site, but that's understandable. That's Bill Gates being here with these. It's an experimental nuclear technology. So I want to be mindful that we have that bill going where I don't see the economic development other than for the interests right there. But this bill really provides an opportunity for other businesses to come into the state and to grow ones that are already here in Wyoming. And just to drive that home, and Senator Rothfuss may appreciate my reference here, I brought a small prop. It's a carrot. I think what we're going to need to see some of the larger utilities participate in these deregulated power zones is some sort of carrot or stick to incentivize them. As the bills right now, I don't see Rocky Mountain working with anybody, but I am encouraged to know that with the state lands, we could be able to have some of these deregulated zones very close to substations, so there won't be all of the transmissions costs. So I'm hoping as this development develops, we have some carrots or sticks for the large utilities to work with companies that are miners. But for right now, it really is a great bill and a great opportunity to take a step in the right direction for scaled economic development. And God bless economic development in Wyoming.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, you may have to have a larger carrot. I've seen what the Easter Bunny does to the carrots, and
I believe
you might
Mr.
have to have a
Murphy-
bigger one, Mr. Wait, Mr. Murphy, we got some questions
Yeah.
for you.
Mr.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to
Senator
note that
Rothfuss.
he's a Mustang. I thought that would be relevant to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 03.
That's good. He doesn't look like a Mustang, but that's all right. Any other questions for Mr. Murphy Mustang? Any other questions? I have a question. You're saying you need large industrial generation, 2 megawatts and higher. In my previous life, I sold a lot of generation in Wyoming. 2 megawatts for one of our units is a pretty large unit. That's one of our larger engines that we produce. And I'm kind of curious as to how you get that to larger than 2 megawatts. I understand a nuclear plant, but I was thinking these were small engine-driven natural gas operations, but larger than 2 megawatt, it may not be.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So what we have going on here, what we're talking about is think of them as large data centers. 2 megawatts is not much for these large data centers. A good example to kind of help drive this home is Peter Thiel, the billionaire. His brother owns or operates Marathon Digital. It's one of the largest digital mining companies in the country. And he called it an arms race, what's going on now with building Bitcoin mining operations, because it takes so much capital to build these. So when we talk about 2 or 3 megawatts, that's not going to attract any of that kind of large interest. That's very small. Anything, south of 25 megawatts, that's not interesting. So we can kind of, these are big numbers. This is the future industry of Wyoming. Like I'm a hospice volunteer, so pardon the reference, but coal is on hospice. Like, we're taking care of coal, but this is not the play for the future. The energy needs are going to be in this digital metaverse where it takes a lot of computing power and a lot of energy.
So not less than 25 megawatts per designated area, or you're thinking statewide?
Well, I think it would be safe to think about it like this, that these deregulated power zones create a way to have land available for these large scale opportunities. So there could be a Bitcoin miner in one of these that's using 50 megawatts, 75 megawatts. Maybe it's a bunch of small little ones that are all partnering together and working inside there. But what exists right now is not the option to negotiate and work with the utility providers in a deregulated way. And that's what has to happen for scaled large contracts to happen for Bitcoin miners.
Other questions for Mr. Murphy? Questions for Mr. Murphy?
I got one.
Yeah. Oh, Senator Cooper.
Chairman, thank you. Sir, could you, my hang up on this whole thing right now is the state lands deal. I see it as constrictive. Is there any reason that you, with the right legislation, that we couldn't be doing this on fee lands? I'm not sure why we're restricting it to state lands. Any thoughts on that, sir?
Yes,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman and Senator Cooper. I think the state lands, as I understand it, it's actually a great opportunity here, because the cost to transmit power to a data center, think of it like this, is expensive. And a lot of Bitcoin miners are not going to pay those millions of dollars to run, power cords all across pastures. So the ability to have state lands involved helps us look at land close to substations, so that we're able to say, wow, we don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars to transmit this power. So it's actually a very important piece, I think, is having state land involved to say, where are these places close to substations and power generation, so that the companies will actually do this. They'll actually move here.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's an awful lot of fee lands right next to a power substation also. I guess I'm not seeing any reason to limit this to state lands. If we want to stay off the federal lands for now, I can see that maybe because of the regulatory issues, but those regulatory issues are not necessarily there on fee lands. And why would we limit private enterprise from being involved in this and limit it to just state lands?
Senator Rothfuss.
And that was something we discussed during the interim, and it really comes down to the logistics of the how to do it more than whether it's a good idea. I don't think anyone's averse to the idea of having something similar on private land. It just comes down to, at that point, you start having the requirements. You've got a competition at that point. I want it to be on my state land. Senator Biden wants to be on his state land. And then you've got a property right, and then that property right creates obligations under property law and lawsuits, and the fact that you can't revoke it, as well as you have the awkward circumstance of what's the approval process for that, where you get into sponsorship requirements, where you have elected officials sponsoring one person's private land for designation of a deregulated zone. One of the key concerns, and you'll hear it when we hear from the opponents of the legislation, is the idea that if this gets too big, it undermines the regulated utility structure and the process that we have in place and the benefits of it. Now, I think most of them would think that, even a single acre is going to take us down a bad path, and that's what they would advocate for. I don't think a single acre is going to do that, but I do think that if it is expansive, it will do that. So the idea was, all right, if we want limitations and we don't want to get into the property right concept, which, as I said, this bill's already not that short, but it's not that long. If we had to do it for private property, I don't know how to do it. And I gave it a lot of thought, and I have no idea what the right answer is. So a lot of the reason why it doesn't go on private land is because I didn't know how to do that. And nobody else could tell me.
Follow up, please.
Yes.
I guess my point on it is if I have the choice in the middle of my pasture, whether the lease is going to the state or the lease is going to me, I'd rather the funds come to me. It's as simple as that. The state will reimburse for a little bit, but it precludes the landowner who's impacted around the state lease. My properties are a mixture of state, fee, and federal. I would rather be able to site this where I want it in my property and control it, rather than have it dictated to me that it has to be over here and on my state land. So,
Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree. It's just not easy to do that. And honestly, Senator Cooper, if you have an idea of how to structure an amendment that does that, I'm interested. It's just that really I spent a lot of time, and so did the committee, trying to work through some of these problems and talking with agencies, and this is a lot cleaner than that system, but I'm open to it, as well as it's not unreasonable in any way to start in one place and then try and find a solution to that next year by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not averse to that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I add one thing on that
yes.
that might clarify? So right now, Senator Cooper, a Bitcoin mining company could go to a private individual like yours with land and do a deal. If you were right next to a substation, that would be something that would be done, but it would then be in the regulated environment. The contracts would be negotiated. The intent of this bill is really to help support the state too, and create more value on these lands. It's my understanding that it's a win for the state, it's a win for the utilities, it's a win for the companies, it's a kind of a full lifting economic development. But if you have land next to a power station and you want to have Bitcoin miners there, get in touch with them.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, thank you for your testimony. We're running short on time. We've got about 17 minutes left. Hopefully get this bill done. So do we have other public comment? I didn't see your hand flash, Mary, but let's hear from the PSC, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mary Throne with the Wyoming Public Service Commission. I just wanted to answer any questions if you had them. I need to get back to a hearing. If you don't have any questions, I might do that.
The question I had, one of the speakers brought up that did we think we had authority from the PSC to do this? Do you think that we have authority to do that?
Mr. Chairman, we haven't discussed that with state lands, but our sense was we would treat this something akin to what we do in the industrial siting process, where we identify concerns and ship them off to industrial siting. I mean, it's not entirely comparable, but that's what we do in that case.
Okay, all right.
And I could also add that if there were an objection, we have a lot of processes where somebody could come in and question our recommendation, and obviously that would slow down the process. But I think the framework for that exists in our structure now.
Other questions for Ms. Throne? Other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for being here with us. Right over here, Winnie. Give us a quick one. Please.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County, you sparked my thinking in talking about coming up with 2 gigawatts of electrical power. One of the ships I commanded was a submarine tender with diesel electric propulsion, and it was designed to supply shore power also. And it could produce 9 megawatts of 60 hertz AC power. I think you need to be thinking in terms, if you want to do something quick for these guys, you could put some big slow-speed diesels in relatively quickly. And they're putting them in ships. They have cylinders that are like 10 feet in diameter. Here's a picture of a crankshaft that I just pulled up of one of those, and you can see some people in it. So it's a pretty big engine. And you could probably produce that order of magnitude power fairly quickly right on site for them, powered by natural gas. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions? Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Are we going to hear from anybody else? I think we might. We've got 14 minutes now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the county commissioners. I'll keep my comments brief and limited to the commissioner's role in this particular piece of legislation. Certainly don't have any perspective to offer on whether the zone should exist or not, and certainly appreciate that there is an economic development potential that could benefit communities. Mr. Chairman, what we do like about the bill, first off, is that commissioners are involved and they're informed as the way that this is structured, and certainly appreciate that this is an optional element. I think the concern that the commissioners do have is it seems to put them in an awkward position between an industry that is looking to come up, these regulated utilities, state lands, and whether they really have the ability to analyze those things as they then designate where they would like these things to exist. I don't have a perfect solution for you on how to fix that in the legislation, but commissioners are concerned about that burden that might be put on them that, again, is a bit awkward in all of those spaces. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Just briefly, Mr. Riemann, would you want us then to remove the commissioners from the process? Because I think we could probably have just an independent appeal directly to the Board of Land Commissioners by any entity and bypass that. It seemed to me that the county commissioners would be most knowledgeable about what is and isn't appropriate within the community as elected officials, but I don't know if anyone would object to just removing the commissioners from the process if you prefer.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that's certainly one solution. The problem that I ran up against that solution and why I didn't bring it to you today is that it goes against what I suggested are the benefits is that were included in the process. So I think maybe a more nuanced approach of ensuring that county commissioners are involved in that discussion, because obviously they're looking out for the community and trying to understand where should these sorts of things be positioned within the county borders. So I think at least finding some other ground perhaps in which they can continue to play a role, but not be in that awkward position of perhaps even telling the state what it should do with its own land. Although,
Okay.
All right, Mr. Chairman, yeah, and I'll be happy to work with you and chat more about that. I'm honestly a little bit surprised that the county commissioners that honestly have been coming to us for years asking for more tools, more power, more responsibility would come to us today and say, but we don't want to get between the utilities and anyone, and we don't want to make the decision in this space. That surprises me, but if you have suggestions on how we can take away any of the, I guess, political responsibility for this from the commissioners and just have them as a maybe advisory capacity or something, we can certainly explore that.
Mr. Chairman, and don't let my comments be taken as suggesting we don't want to have a role. I just, from the conversations that I've engaged with the commissioners, it's whether they have the technical expertise within them as individuals or within their staff in order to go through and analyze some of these decisions that have to be made under this and whether we're best positioned to do that. So again, I don't think that we're shirking from that traditional desire to be involved. It's simply whether we have the capacity to do it appropriately.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Ryman? Other questions? Other questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Ryman. Anyone else? We have 10 minutes now. We have 10 minutes, so make it brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. You should have a fact sheet for me. It was sent to you last week, so it's been a while. I'm glad to finally be here to talk about this bill with you all today. So our organization also, we formed a group called the Wyoming Association of Ratepayers. So I also speak on their behalf as well. And we're really honestly very concerned about this bill and the idea that we would have within the state of Wyoming effectively two systems of electricity, one deregulated in these zones and one regulated outside the zones. And it just becomes very complicated in terms of common generation sources, transmission, distribution lines, everything that you and me as ratepayers of these utilities, we've bought into the system. We've provided rates that have created a system, and now we're, allowing these zones to be created where there could be, folks that use that system, but it's really unclear how that will all work with, again, the regulated part and the unregulated part. States are either deregulated or regulated. There aren't states that are doing this. And we're very concerned that we're kind of rushing the process and not thinking it all through in terms of the consequences that could result. And particularly, I think as we move from, again, a regulated system to deregulated zones, there are provisions in the bill, again, for the Public Service Commission to provide input. But unfortunately, that input is at the very beginning of the process. And we may not even know how much power is going to be needed, who the consumers of that power will be. The bill allows for anyone in this deregulated zone to be commercial or industrial. It's not just about cryptocurrency mining, and I think that's important for you to know. So when you deregulate one of these zones, it opens it up not to maybe not just the people that are interested at the time, but potentially other people down the line. That want to kind of come in and use that deregulated power zone. But again, the Public Service Commission review is at the very front end. And so they might not at that time have the best information or all the information to be able to provide the best advice to, as Mr. Riemann was saying, the county commissioners who are the ones who have to decide where to designate these zones. We're also I think concerned about the state lands piece and again, impact on existing lessees and the complexity again with the deregulation. And there could be lessees within the zone already that are regulated customers of a utility. And it's unclear under the bill what happens to them when the state section becomes deregulated. Do they have to then opt into that system? Can they stay regulated? How does the utility then navigate that? So for instance, maybe there's an oil and gas lessee who has a series of wells in that state land section, and they want to have a new well in that state land section after the designation of the deregulated zone. Do they have to then be a deregulated customer? Can they stay regulated? Again, I think there's just some unintended consequences of the bill that haven't really been thought through. I would also second Mr. Crowder's comment on the rules. So page 8 of the bill, section 4, it requires any rulemaking to be done by July 1st this year. For anyone who knows the regulatory process, that's pretty unreasonable to have rulemaking completed in that time. Your session ends March 11th. The governor has 10 days. We're looking at the end of March. There's a 45-day notice period under the Administrative Procedures Act. public comment process, hearing, and then there's the process of, governor consistency review and all of that. I mean, it's frankly impossible to have rules done by that time, and particularly good rules. And we would want, state lands to think about leasing terms and conditions. How much revenue are we going to raise? Bonding, financial insurance. This is an industry that frankly is a little speculative. Some of the companies I think are well-meaning and have the resources. Some of them don't. And there's a reason why our traditional utilities aren't interested in doing business with them. They're just not good business partners. And so, we want to make sure that if the state does business with them, that we are choosing the right business partners and having the right regulation for things like bonding and financial assurance. So we don't have these data centers created on our state lands and somebody walks away and all of a sudden we have not an orphan well problem, but an orphan data center problem on our state lands, which could happen. So with that, happy to answer any of your questions. I know it's tight on time, but this is a very
Okay.
complex bill. So
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions for Shannon? Thank you, Shannon.
yeah, thank you.
Anyone else to speak to the Minerals Committee about this? How many more people are there to speak to the Minerals Committee? 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to take a brief recess, and I'm going to get permission to extend this so we can get this bill done. Yes,
So it'll be second reading of the budget that we're going back to.
right, I know.
And those are all roll call votes.
That's why I need to get permission.
I don't think we want permission. I think we might need to do this tomorrow morning if we can. I don't know what the rest of the committee, or tomorrow lunch. I don't know what everyone else's schedule is, but we've also got the stable coin as well. And I don't want to cut off public testimony.
What is anybody's,
I'm free both.
tomorrow morning look like?
I'm free morning and lunch.
Everybody free tomorrow morning? Okay.
Cool.
Let's do that then. Let's continue public testimony. We have 4 people at least that want to testify. We'll continue this tomorrow morning at, what time is your pleasure?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock?
8 o'clock. That'll
8
give us
o'clock?
a chance to talk about the stable token as well.
Okay, all right, we'll do that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll
Yes.
find out what room and let you know.
Okay,
what will
all right,
be
thank you.
available.
Thank you, everybody, for being
Thank
here.
you,
Sorry
everybody,
that
for
we
being
weren't
here.
able to get done.